Good morning, everybody. I was listening to a video this morning about the subject of atheist churches. It was a channel, I think it's called Now Meme This. I was amazed. I noticed that within one day, this video already had something like 14,000 views. So they asked for comments on it, and so here are my comments. I've actually discussed this earlier on this channel to a certain extent, but this is going to be a little bit of a more nuanced approach. For those who are new to the channel, obviously you can see by the way I'm dressed, I'm a Hasidic Jew. I happen to be an ordained rabbi, and I also, I'm more than an ordained rabbi. I served as a rabbi of a synagogue for years, and currently my full-time job, though, is as a prison chaplain. And so this is where my nuanced approach has to come from, because on one hand I wear my rabbi hat quite literally, but then I have another hat as a prison chaplain, and we're told as prison chaplains that we must wear many hats. So I have my personal views about atheism. Obviously, I'm a person who not only believes in God, but as the Bible commands us in Deuteronomy, and you should know on this day and return it upon your heart, reflect upon your heart that the Lord is God and there's no other. It's not just that we're supposed to believe in God, but we're supposed to know God exists. And Maimonides brings this in his code of law, that we are required to know God. And I think of someone who was not from the Jewish faith, Carl Jung, when they asked him, I saw it was on YouTube, someone uploaded an interview with Carl Jung from the 1950s, and the interviewer asked him, do you believe in God? He said, I know that God exists. And that's how, as Jews, we are commanded, as believing Jews, as religious Jews, we are commanded not only to believe in God, but to know God, and to know that God exists. The idea of belief in God is more of an idea of trusting God, that we know that God is trustworthy and that He's proven Himself, and it's based on what God has proven Himself. It's not so much of a matter of theology, although we love theology. We have a hymn that I particularly love. It's a series of 7 rather long hymns called the Hymns of Unity, the Shir HaYichud. And in these hymns, it lists out our theology in a beautiful poetic form, talking about God, how much we believe in God and love God and know God's existence and what we know about God. Similarly, we have other hymns like Adon Olam and others that talk about these issues. But part of it is also that we have to recognize the truth of God as religious Jews. That's when I'm wearing my rabbi hat, and that's something that I take with me in my whole life all the time. It's not something that I can divest from in any way. However, with that being said, I work for a living, I have a job, and my job is as a prison chaplain, and most rabbis who are prison chaplains, we talk about like rabbis who serve part-time as prison chaplains, are ministering, particularly as rabbis, mainly to Jewish people, or to people who identify somehow with Judaism, which are usually better than, in my opinion, the ones who are not actually Jewish but identify with Judaism, usually are a lot better to work with than people who just happen to have been born Jewish but don't really have much to do with their faith. But that's a different issue, and that, although it's related to what we're discussing here. But I'm not the only one in the world, but the only one in the state where I serve. Don't need to mention which state it is. It happens to not be the state where I live in. But as a chaplain, I am the supervisor for all the religions in my institution. And so it's my duty to the state that I serve to protect religious freedom and to make sure that people are able to grow. Obviously they're in prison. It's the Department of Corrections. We are concerned that these men in my institution and in some of the other institutions, women, should be corrected, meaning they should leave these institutions better than they got in when they return back to society. And that's what the whole purpose is. And so chaplaincy is integral in that. Now, when it comes to issues of religion can be used either way. Religion can be, and usually is in most people's lives, a great tool to bring people to better themselves, in addition to the particular parochial aspects of these faiths. But on the other hand, religion can sometimes be used it can be abused. And that's also part of our job as chaplains, to call people out when they're abusing their religion. But also there are certain religions that tend to be, it's particularly in prison, they're almost known somewhat as more like prison cults, even though they exist as a religion outside of prison. But some of these religions almost have as many adherents inside as they do outside. They're rather small, and they tend to attract a certain element, but it doesn't have to be that way. A lot of these religions people come to in prison. And I don't mean this in a bigoted way, because I do believe that people can better themselves using these other religions that I might theologically disagree with and might have other issues with politically and so forth. But I do believe that if people are ministered to in the right way from their own traditions, whether it's a tradition they received or a tradition that they've accepted, obviously they're receiving it from somebody, or in certain cases people do make up their own religions in prison, but even those are generally based on existing religions. As a state worker, it's my job to protect these people's rights and ensure that they are able to practice their religions in the ways that basically we won't get sued. That's the one thing. A lot of things are based on how the courts have seen things, how the courts have interpreted things, and so therefore how we approach the First Amendment and the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act and other issues around religious freedom. And so it's a balancing act. And so therefore I strive to, as a supervisor of the religion department, find volunteers who will serve certain religious communities that have a reputation of being problematic. I don't know if I should name them by name. I don't mean to be bigoted against them, because I do support prison ministry through these traditions. I'm not looking to convert anybody to any particular religion. I know when I was hired as a chaplain in this particular institution, the head of the religion department statewide told one of my chaplains that he was happy to hire a rabbi, because he said, the chaplains from one majority religion will want everyone to be their religion, and from the other majority religion will want them to be from their religion, and the rabbi will just do his job. And the thing is, I learned to compartmentalize, because I always say I don't care if somebody's Jewish, even somebody's very active. I mean, I've told people, I was like, we have one guy and one inmate who wears a long beard and wears a yarmulke and fringe garments, tzitzis all the time, and he's very, very Jewish, obviously, and he's of Jewish ancestry also, meaning he was born in this religion. This is his everything. He's not really as religious as he dresses, I would say, but he will, he's Jewish on all different levels. And I always say, I don't care if he would go convert to Islam or become a Jehovah's Witness or Wiccan or something else or nothing. I don't care. My job is, as long as he's doing what he's doing, to serve him. And that part of that is because of my experience before in prison ministry, where I was very much devoted to one inmate who I kind of looked up to as a rabbinical figure. I still believe that he was innocent, and I still respect him, and I still believe he is innocent. He's in a different prison, different system. But I realized I wasn't doing my job very well, just because, and so I have to compartmentalize and not fall into that trap. But anyway, with all this being said, what does this have to do with this issue of atheist churches? So, part of my feeling in the approach to this is that if I am going to be accepting not only the other monotheist religions that we pretty much are on the same page with 90% of what we believe, and even what we believe to be important practices of our faith and so forth, whether it's Christianity or Islam, I put them in the same category. Although the truth is we have more in common with Islam and Judaism. Jews and Christians in the current era tend to get along better, but in the old days, Jews and Muslims got along better, and different things. There are different issues that have to do with that. But I try to get along with everybody personally. But just the same, with those groups, I have much more in common. I would say theologically and practically we have more in common with the Muslims, but scripturally we of course have more in common with the Christians. But that's neither here nor there. The fact is, I have to serve people who practice Native American spirituality. I have to serve people who practice Wicca, who practice Odinism or Asatru, Buddhists and Hindus and so forth. And I truly, it's not like even it's a struggle. I've always been fascinated by different religions for a long time. I won't say always, not maybe when I was a small child. I kind of didn't want to have anything to do with religion. I was, more along the humanist or atheist side, while maintaining certain Jewish cultural aspects. But then, later in life, I don't know, when I was like 13 or 14, is when I really came to religion in a concerted way. But the point that I'm bringing out here is that then I was, I guess, more of, as a teenager, I was very much a religious zealot, my way or the highway, and then I came to a condition where I think I am now, and I'm working on now, of pretty much recognizing that there is place for pluralism in the world, and that it's not our place to be, saying my way or the highway. I gotta get these brakes checked. And what I mean by that is, it's a biblical idea. It says in the Bible, from the rising of the sun to the setting thereof, great is my name among the nations, says the Lord of hosts. Every place where this is at Malachi 1:11, every place where they're offering offerings and incense and so forth, it's to my name. It's a pure oblation. It's a pure offering, mincha tahora. And the way I understand that, obviously the context of what Malachi is saying is in the sense of what we call in Hebrew musar, an ethical teaching, to say, don't think you're hot stuff, just because who's talking to the priests in Jerusalem after the second temple was built. He said, don't think that you're so high and mighty just because you happen to be serving the true God in his sanctuary in Jerusalem, because really the truth is all the pagans, even if they're using some different names and this and that, they don't know any better. It's all me. Says God. Meaning God accepts the prayers of all religions. So obviously, when we're coming to Christianity and Islam, who profess the same God that we do, and revere our same scriptures, at least to a certain extent, we are dealing with, someone that we could that obviously we have much more in common with. But the truth is, Malachi was of course talking in the pre-Christian era, which means that all these pagans, all these heathens who worship these many gods, ultimately are worshiping the one divinity, and God accepts their offerings. God accepts their worship because of their ignorance. Now, Christianity, Paul was obviously convinced he wasn't really talking about a second coming the way that we understand in Christianity today. Paul was convinced that the second coming was imminent, and so in the book of Acts, Paul tells the people in Rome that the age of ignorance has passed, but 2,000 years have shown that no, the age of ignorance is not past. We're not in a state where, like Isaiah says, that the waters cover the earth, like that the knowledge of the Lord covers the earth like the waters cover the sea. The fact that Christianity has a mission, has their Great Commission, proves that idea wrong, that the Messiah has come, and so that's why in their theology they're waiting for a second coming, which is fine with me. I don't have a problem with that from their perspective. And so when the time comes, if it's a first coming or second coming doesn't really matter much. What really matters for me as a Jew is I'm bound by a covenant. I don't believe when the Messiah comes that we will be divested of this covenant, and so it doesn't matter. That's the main disagreement that I would have with certain Christians, and it's not even the issue of replacement theology. I don't have as much of an issue with replacement theology that somehow that the church is the new Israel. That doesn't bother me the way that it bothers many Jews, and it bothers many Christians as well. And I'm fine the other way too. I don't care one way or the other. The major issue for me as a Jew is that the meaning of Jewishness is not an issue of birth, and not an accident of birth. There are no accidents. Obviously, everything is by divine providence. But rather, it's an issue of faith and covenant. Meaning that by virtue of one's faith, one enters a covenant with God, and that covenant are these commandments. And so my approach would be that Paul was essentially teaching with the rabbis. He was a Pharisee by his own admittance. That would be the terminology that he used, which I don't believe that the rabbis actually used to self-identify. They more or less used this term in a negative sense, certainly in the Gemara and Sota, and in the Mishnah and Yadayim, it was more or less presented as how, these are different texts in the Talmud, it was presented, this is how the Sadducees referred to the Pharisees, not how the Pharisees self-identified, not that they called themselves Pharisees. So when Paul calls himself a Pharisee of Pharisees, he's talking to the people that he's talking to. He knows his audience, and he's using a terminology that they would understand. But in any event, oh my goodness, I meant this to be a 5-minute video and I just keep rambling on. I'm sorry about that. I'm commenting on a 9-minute video and it's already gone 22 minutes and I haven't even gotten to the point I want to discuss yet. And so that's really the difference that I have. I'm probably going to have to make a separate video on this then. Is Christianity's belief of exclusivity and replacement of covenant. And as opposed to my understanding is that the Christian message to the Gentile world was essentially the embracing of the older covenant, meaning bringing the people who had become over history, who had abandoned the truth of monotheism that the world was created with, that Adam and Eve were given, that Noah, who was the father of all nations, knew, and how these peoples eventually started to worship other gods. Maimonides explains that happened as a means of really respect to God, meaning that these quote-unquote other gods were servants of the one true God, and that it was a means of having, of respecting God by respecting His servants. The same way, would say that, someone respects a king by showing respect to his ministers, to his courtiers, to members of his court. And so therefore the ancient peoples would worship the sun and the moon and so forth, and various angels and other beings, because these were the servants of God, and this was a means of showing devotion to God. But eventually they forgot about God and only focused on these cults of these other beings, that they were these creatures, these creations that God had created and were not worthy of worship. And again, there can be this discussion of the difference between veneration and worship, or even kindred and worship. I was listening to an Odinist, because with the COVID-19 issue, we're not allowed to have gatherings, so we show videos, and I've been showing YouTube videos to the inmates, and I have to review what am I showing these guys to make sure there's nothing radical or inappropriate. And there was one Odinist video where they were talking about how members of that religion feel a kindred with their gods. It's not about that they are servants of these gods, but rather friends of these gods. The thing is that, again, I wouldn't call them gods. We can question on what level they exist, whether they only exist in these people's minds, or they exist on some level, or there's some kind of angels or demons or extraterrestrials or whatever they are, or they just simply don't exist in any tangible way. It doesn't really matter. But if in Jewish liturgy, we certainly have this vision of being in kindred with the angels in a certain sense, and that sense is solely in the worship of the one true God. Meaning we join together with the angels in our liturgy to declare God as one, to declare there's nothing else but God, to declare that we were all created by God, and that angels are not worthy of worship or anything, or any other extraterrestrial or supernatural or extra-dimensional beings. These are not worthy of our worship, but they are worthy of our kindred. And that kindred is for a combined message of worship. Because we are all together worshiping God. We're all together declaring God's holiness, declaring God is blessed, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. We say that together with the seraphim in our liturgy, as other religious Christians have the same thing in their liturgy. That's essentially joining with the saints and joining with the angels and so forth in worship. And that the veneration of these saints is more of a kindred with these saints. And so therefore that's how I understand these reconstructed pagans, neo-pagans are approaching their approach to their religion. I don't know if that's really how things were done in ancient times, but again, that because those are reconstructed practices. But essentially, what I understand is that how I read Acts is that Paul was trying to bring the pagan world back to monotheism and restore them to the ancient monotheism of Noah. Jesus really didn't have so much of a message to the Gentile world. Jesus was somewhat racist against Gentiles. If you really read the Gospels, obviously people are going to say, well, you have to take that in context, and he was speaking from his culture and so forth, which is kind of anti-Semitic, to be honest, because the truth is that whether or not that these ideas existed in the culture doesn't mean that they were necessarily right, and that's a problem that I have in general with Judaism. But the truth is, though, that in the early church, again, I'm not a Christian, so it doesn't really matter to me. I see this more as a historical interest. First of all, one of the things that Jesus rebuked the Pharisees for was their zeal in conversion, but then turning their converts, turning the souls that they won into just as bad as they are, which is a problem that we still have today. It's really true. But the fact is that it bears out, though, that the ones that he was calling the Pharisees, the people who believed in the rabbinical traditions that we hold dear, were not racists. They were seeking converts from the other nations, and it was more of an issue that the dangers of seeking converts. And yet today, particularly with the rise of Zionism and secular Jewish identity and so forth, we find a much more problematic issue of what I believe to be racism in the Jewish community, and part of that is this Pauline doctrine of that the Torah is too difficult for those who are not born into it, and they should not be fully converting. because it's too much. And that's pretty much the whole message of Paul. I don't think Paul was saying that to the born Jew. I think he was saying that certainly to the church in Galatia. He was saying that. Whereas James and Peter and some of the others were saying that actually the Gentiles who want to follow Jesus should convert to Judaism, should be circumcised. So you have that dichotomy, and I kind of, obviously to me it's not about anything to do with Jesus, but the point is that I believe that if someone believes in Torah, they should ideally fully convert to Judaism. I see remaining, and I used to see it differently, but my worldview on this has changed. I do believe that we should be encouraging people to convert to Judaism, as the Code of Jewish Law says, instead of as people just say, we were supposed to turn people down from conversion. We're supposed to refuse someone 3 times. This is nonsense. It's not. I mean, it's based in the Midrash, but it's not halacha. It's not Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says we don't push away a convert too much. I have not gotten to the subject I want to talk to. I rambled on for a half hour. Let's maybe make a separate video. Although I do need to learn a little bit before I get to work, or at least know what I'm up to. Check my where I'm up to in my learning schedule, and I should eat and drink something because I already davened this morning. So thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. And maybe in the next video we'll talk a little bit about this idea of atheist churches, perhaps atheist chaplaincy, and how we should view that in a pluralistic world, meaning essentially, just briefly, what I've discussed is that people should, if let's say in a prison setting, if people are going to be learning ethics and morals, I don't care where it's coming from. I don't care if it's coming from Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Odinism, Wicca, Native American spirituality, or atheism, or humanism. But on the other hand, if people are doing wrong things and being bigoted and so forth, and what I mean wrong is by the rules of the Department of Corrections at the very least, doing things we're not supposed to be encouraging, doing things we're supposed to be discouraging, and using religion as a tool for that, so we have to put an end to that. And again, I don't care if it's coming even from my own Judaism. Certainly not from my own Judaism. I find that to be repulsive. And the same thing, whether it's coming from Christianity, Islam. Obviously, the inmates will believe these things on their own. But we don't need to be feeding those ogres, those trolls. And so too, if a volunteer wants to come into the prison and be teaching, ethics by Bertrand Russell or something, gesund to hate. If it's going to make these guys better people, that's what I want to see. But if he's going to be teaching them bigotry against the other religions, I see it as problematic. That's as a chaplain. Now, in a general, as an American worldview, I believe that we have to. We're not going to get rid of the atheists, right? But what we have to do is make it absolutely clear that atheism is a religious view, and atheism is essentially a religion. And so therefore, they have to be on the same level playing field with all the other religions. And so therefore, if they're going to say there's no prayer in public schools and so forth, even though that's very nuanced, but I'm saying in a more general way, I saw the movie God's Not Dead 2 with, Melissa Joan Hart. Clarissa explains it all. So in that movie, she got in trouble for quoting from the Bible something to do with Martin Luther King, which really there's nothing illegal about that, but I could see people making a big deal about it and even making lawsuits about it, even though they would win the lawsuit. But with that type of case, it has to be the same level playing field, that whatever standards are placed upon Christianity in a public school, particularly in America that's a majority Christian country, and yet they're being really persecuted in the public square. If they are being denied certain things in a public school, the atheists should be denied those same things. And atheists get to hide behind, oh, it's not a religion. But it is a religion, and that's why they have these atheist churches. And that's why, for America, not for the people who are part of it necessarily, unless they're gaining something with that, but in general, for the purpose of freedom and for Christianity and for other religions, in America, there is a positive aspect of these atheist churches and so forth. And in the same way, people who get upset that there are Muslim prayers during Ramadan in public schools and so forth, they should see, the Christians who are upset about that should see that as an opportunity and not as a crisis. I understand why atheists would be upset about it, but generally they're not, because usually the atheism is not against religion in general, unless you're Bill Maher. Generally, these people are just upset at whatever religion they came from, and so if they used to be Christians, there are issues with Christianity, and if they used to be Muslims, there are issues with Islam, and if they used to be Orthodox Jews, there are issues with Orthodox Judaism, and so forth. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. We'll see you all later. Take care.